So now I have this question. This is just an interesting concept for you to go and think and do manana and think about this. Uddalaka has spoken so much about ignorance, ajnana, avidya, and we all know that ajnana is the root cause of samsara and suffering. So I just put it a question just to make it a bit more provocative so that we can think about these concepts of philosophy that is there in Vedanta. In Vedanta, as you know, there are at least three strands of Vedanta: Dvaita, Advaita, Visishta Advaita. So with these fundamentals that we have understood, then we should go and do our own internal homework, our own homework and research. So what do our acharyas think about this problem? So I've kind of put a very brief 2 or 3 slides to give you a hint as to what shall I put, how enriched our philosophy is to think about various pros and cons. How? So if ignorance is the root cause of samsara and suffering, the question is, who gets ignorance that leads to samsara? Does Brahman get ignorance or the jivas get ignorance? Okay, that is how the acharyas face this question. Okay, so in the monastic school, it's called Brahma Ajnanavada. So in the monastic school of Advaita, for example, ignorance is on Brahman. Okay, in the realistic schools, which is called Swabhava Ajnanavada, ignorance is on the jivas. Okay, so these are the two ends of the spectrum of philosophical views in our Vedanta. So go and read. My hope here is I'm able to enthuse you to go and do your reading and then convince yourself which philosophy will appeal to you. Okay, so let us look at the Advaita view of this. And I've got the signpost here. We did it in the journey of souls, I think. So I've just put this back. So when we talk about ignorance, we need to know what is it, where is it, who has it, when did it come in, why, and how do you get rid of it? So these are all some of the questions that we will ask. So the first question is, what is this ignorance? Is this a substance? Is this a real entity? So from a Advaita, from a monastic view, it is an unreal entity. It is not something that is a tangible entity that exists. It is what is called as a mithya bhuta. It is anirvachaniya. It's sadasad vilakshana. So you can read about this concept. Fascinating stuff of how our acharyas approach these problems. So for the monastic school, that ignorance is an unreal entity. And where is that ignorance? The ignorance is on the nirguna Brahman. So there is a superimposition of avidya, and that avidya does a lot of things to the nirguna Brahman. When you have this avidya, and it is also called maya, it is called ajnana, there are various terms, upadi, they're all the same, upadi, avidya, maya, and so they're all similar, they're the same, they're different names for the same entity. So the avidya goes on to the nirguna Brahman, and when that happens, it becomes saguna Brahman. And when the Saguna Brahman has further avidya, it becomes jivas, you and me. And when this avidya goes on to the Nirguna Brahman, it also becomes prakriti. Okay, so that is the Advaita view. Okay, so you can think about this problem a little bit more. I've got all these details there. I don't want to go into this because we don't have time, but it might take another 1 hour to go through this. But it is all there in the journey of souls, where there is this key concept called Anubandha Chatushtaya for Shastra Vichara. There has to be an adhikari, a qualified student. So in the monastic school, one who does not know that Brahmatma Aikya is the qualified student. What is the Vishaya? The Vishaya is the Brahmatma Aikya concept. Okay. For example, this Tat Tvam Asi that we have been talking about tells you about the Brahmatma Aikya from a monastic perspective. Prayojana. What is the Prayojana? Removal of the ignorance of Brahmatma Aikya. And having a sensible relationship between these three is called Sambandha. Okay. So that is what the Anubandha Chatushtaya concept in the monastic schools, whereas the other schools will ask some really difficult question. Ajnana sambhavadeva tanmatam akilam apakritam. How can ignorance cover the all-knowing? Mundaka Upanishad basically defines this Brahman as yes sarvajnaha sarvavid, yasya jnanam ayam tapaha, satyam jnanam anantam brahma. So all these concepts come in. So if the Brahman is all-knowing and he is omniscient, how can ignorance superimpose on an omniscient being? So that is a contradiction in terms. How do you square that circle? Do your homework and try and understand as to how the monistic philosophers try and tackle that problem. This is, as I said, fascinating literature. Looking at it from the ignorance as per realistic schools. So what is ignorance in the realistic schools? The realistic schools say it is a real entity. Why is it a real entity? You don't have to go too far. Go to Srimad Bhagavatam, and we have done this a million times. And in the sixth stage of creation, this tamas came into being as a real ignorant, as a padartha actually came in. So it is a real entity in realistic school. Okay, who does who puts the ignorance? Or the next question is, where is this ignorance? So first is, ignorance is a real entity. Where is the ignorance? And the realistic school says the ignorance is on the jiva. Okay, and the jivas have forgotten their relationship with the Brahman, and that they are eternally dependent on him, but they are facing towards Prakriti and are attached to Prakriti, and they think they are in control of Prakriti, and because of that they are going through samsara and suffering. Is the realistic view there. And who puts this ignorance? The same Brahman fellow puts that, because Shvetashvatara Upanishad says samsara moksha sthiti bandha hetu. And Gita says, Sarvasya cha hridi sannivishtaha mattaha smritir jnanam apohanam cha. Skanda Purana again says, Bandako bhavapashena bhavapachascha mochakaha kaivalyadaha param brahma vishnureva sanatanaha. He is the one who has put us in bandha, and he is the one who will take us out of bandha. So in the realistic schools, it is the supreme Brahman who is actually gives the ignorance so that the jivas can work out their salvation. When does he do it? Anadi mayaya shuktaha yada jivaha prabudyate ajam anidram apswapnam advaitam budyate tada. We have done this verse in Mandukya Upanishad. So go and do a bit of revision on that. It has been there forever in eternal cycles. That ignorance has always been there. Even in Pralaya, these jivas have this linga sharira around it, and they are in ignorance. So there is ignorance everywhere, and they have to just work out. Question is, why is this ignorance there? It is a Satya Sankalpa. It is a necessary step in spiritual evolution, an ordeal to pass through for everyone. Souls shall fulfill themselves only in this way and in no other way. It's called the Satya Sankalpa of Brahman. This is how the conduct of life has to happen in samsara. So that is a realistic view. The reason why the realistic state that view is, if you have a disease called samsara, that disease has to be there, because eradicating a disease only makes sense when the disease is actually real and it is there. If a disease is not there and it is an illusion, there is no reason why I have to get rid of something that does not exist. So that is the argument from the realistic school. So I leave it to you to decide what appeals to you. But the intention here is to give you the two contradicting views of, not contradicting, is two extreme spectrum of views about this ignorance, the concept of ignorance. And we are doing this discussion because Uddalaka is talking about ignorance, and that's what he has dwelt with in example 2 and example 3. So in the realistic school, what is that Anubandha Chatushtaya, or the necessary preconditions for starting philosophical speculation? You need to have an adhikari, a qualified student. Who is the adhikari? A qualified student is described by Jayatirtha here. And we have done this verse before. I'll go through it. It's a beautiful verse. Ihahi Vivida samsarika dukkha darshanena viraktasya shama damadi mato mumukshoho adhikarinaha. He is adhikarin, who the fellow who has gone through samsara, and then he realizes, shit, there is no eternal happiness here. I'm constantly going through ups and downs of this life, and I need a solution for this. That is a mumukshu. That mumukshu is the adhikarinaha. Okay. Tan nivruttayai paramananda avaptyai cha sakala jiva jadatmakat prapanchad paramartata eva atyanta binnam nikila gunodaram nirasta samasta dosham parabrahma pratipadayitum sakala shruti smritinam tad upakarana bhuta Brahma Mimamsayashta Pravritiriti Tattvam. So this is an important sentence that summarizes the whole why we have to do philosophy, why do we have to do Shastra Abhyasa, why do we have to do Adhyatma. exactly for this Anubandha Chatushtaya. The Adhikari is the Mumukshu. What is the Vishya? The subject matter is the Supreme Brahman. What is the Prayojana? The Prayojana is, once you know about the Supreme Brahman, what he does, that you are a dependent being, etc., then you will get his grace. And at some point, your samsara will go and you will join him in eternal bliss. So that is the Anubandha Chatushtaya in the realistic schools when we are talking about ignorance. Okay, so you have two spectrums of views on ignorance. My question here is, what is Uddalaka's view? And I was thinking about this problem yesterday when I was trying to do this slide. What is the Uddalaka views on this problem, which has been a source of debate and discussions between various schools of Vedanta? Okay, so let us look at the first three examples, which actually gives us a clue as to what is the Uddalaka's view here. So in the first example, it is the bird that has ignorance and not the post. The bird is not aware that it is next to the post. That is the example, and we have done that verse. And in the second example, it is the honey drop that has been described as not ignorant that it has come from this flower or it is placed in this beehive. It is not the beehive which is ignorant of the honey drops. That is the second example. And in the third example, it is a river Abhimanidi Devatas that has ignorance that that this component of water in the ocean is theirs. It is not the ocean that is ignorant of the rivers, of the waters of the river. So we should watch these things very carefully when we read the Upanishads, and we should not slip in those kind of scientific analysis and rigor that is expected when we read Upanishads. So when we look at these three examples, it is the bird, it is the nectar droplet, and it is the river that has been explained as having ignorance, and these taps are the jivas. So at least from where I see it, when you look at the Uddalaka's three examples, it is very clear, at least to me, that Uddalaka is thinking about the jivas that are having ignorance. Yeah. So now let us not go too far away to see if there is any other evidence here. Look at Mundaka Upanishad. We have done these verses so many times. Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakaya Samana Vriksham Parishashva Jate Tayor Anyaha Pippalam Swadatti Anashnan Anyaha Abhichakashiti Samane Vrikshe Purusho Nimagnaha Anishaya Shochati Mukhyabanaha Jushtam Yada Pashyati Anyam Isham Asya Mahimanam Iti Vita Shokaha. Okay, so these are all very categorical examples. Basically, he's talking about these two birds which come repeatedly in our sessions, and he says this bird is suffering because it has moved away from this bird, and it thinks that this is in control of everything, but it is suffering in bondage. But the day it realizes that there is this other bird and he is different from him and that he is the controller, then Jushtam yada pashyati anyam isham asya mahimanam iti vita shokaha. Then it loses all its suffering and samsara and goes to heaven. How does it perceive that? Yada pashyaha pashyate rukmavaranam kartaram isham purusham brahmayonim tada vidwan punya papena viduya Niranjanaha Paramam Samyam Upaiti. He becomes similar to him. When he reaches this ocean, like how the water molecules of the river are similar to the water molecules of the ocean, they reach that similarity. Is the overwhelming conclusion of Mundaka Upanishad. I think we should do Mundaka Upanishad at some point. So I hope I was able to give you some critical analysis of the first three illustrations and bring in other views and give you those views of ignorance and how we as independent thinkers, yeah, so we should not be bowed down to dogma or faith, blind faith and dogma. We are rational beings, so we should look at the examples ourselves and do our own research and find out what is the Uddalaka's message. So the Uddalaka's message from these three examples is very clear, that ignorance is the key reason why we are in samsara, and we somehow need to make the journey to get rid of this ignorance, and eventually when that matures into firmed up knowledge, we might be able to reach and go back to our eternal abode.
HinduKnowledgeAcademy.com will celebrate Vedic culture and present its philosophies to the modern Hindu in an accessible format. Our ancient heritage is our greatest strength. Through preservation and dissemination, together let us spread positivity in the world. Thank you for listening and welcome to Hindu Knowledge Academy.